More time here with Eric Bischoff at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino.
Yay! And the crowd goes wild! Well, not really, but in my mind they do.
And in your past they did.
In my past they did, but here we are today. Just you and me in an empty arena.
That's it.
How the mighty have fallen.
Oh my gosh. All right, so they haven't fallen too far.
No, I'm just kidding.
83 weeks with Eric Bischoff podcast. You're doing this with Conrad Thompson. Conrad has a successful podcast with
He's
Bruce.
the Podfather.
He is the Podfather with Bruce Prichard.
Yeah.
That thing has taken off. Now it's on WWE Network, right? I mean, that thing
That's
has
it.
just gone crazy.
That's it. He's gone commercial.
Oh, he has gone
Not me. I'm staying independent.
You're independent. Westwood One is where you can find 83 weeks with Eric Bischoff. Tell us how this formation started with you and Conrad and when it debuted, because it just recently debuted, and it's a weekly podcast. So tell us.
Right. It drops every Sunday at midnight Eastern time, and we do a fresh episode every week. And it really all started. I met Conrad a couple years ago. Bruce had introduced me to Conrad and said, "Hey, there's this guy by the name of Conrad Thompson. He's a very successful mortgage banker in Huntsville, Alabama. He's a huge wrestling fan, and he would like to fly you to his home in Huntsville and just spend a few hours with him and about 5 or 6 of his buddies, very small group, and talk about wrestling." I went, well, that's kind of weird, but sure, I'll do that. And that was how I met Conrad, and it was fun. Once he slipped about 6 or 7 beers into me, and things got a little heated. The questions got a little bit more intense. But fortunately, everybody signed a non-disclosure agreement, so whatever happened at the Conrad Hilton stayed in the Conrad Hilton.
Vegas too. And then, so you guys end up deciding that things went well. Then how did this formation to do this 83 weeks with Eric Bischoff podcast on Westwood One?
Well, fast forward a couple years later, Bruce Prichard decided to launch a podcast with Conrad was doing one with Ric Flair at the time, and Conrad contacted Bruce and said, "Hey, let's do one together," and their podcast took off. It's the #1 wrestling-related podcast in the universe. I mean, it's huge, hugely successful. And I saw the growth, and I listened to the show. Having spent a little bit of time with Conrad, I knew his style. I knew that he would compliment me or vice versa. It would be a good contrast, I guess, in personalities. So when Conrad suggested, "Hey, maybe we do one together," or perhaps I may have suggested it. I can't remember now. We decided, let's do it, and we waited, for a few months to actually launch. But I'm really glad we did, because we're nipping at Bruce Prichard's heels. We're not #1, but damn, we're close.
Eric, tell us what is special about your podcast. What are you guys talking about? What's going on? Bruce has a lot of humor in his podcast and all. Where are we going with yours? I know it just started, but...
Yeah, well, we've had 5 episodes, I think, that we put up so far. And you're right. I mean, Bruce has got amazing stories. He's been in the business since he was like 2, I think, but literally since he was about 16. So he's got, just a wealth of great stories, that involve some of the biggest names and legends in the history of our industry. So that is a great resource. And Bruce is funny as all get out. He's just a funny dude. I went to one of his live shows. Bruce and Conrad do a live event, and we went to one in New Orleans at a venue there. And I sat in the crowd watching it. I thought, man, they could be doing stand-up in Las Vegas. This is so funny. They had the crowd rolling. I mean, they were on the floor. They were laughing. It was a blast. That's the strength of Bruce and Conrad. I think with my show, I'm not funny. I have zero funny DNA. I can never remember a joke. If someone tells me a joke and it's a really good joke, my response is usually, "Wow, that's a really good joke. I'm really impressed with that joke. That was really good." Remember that. But
that's funny. Now that's funny, though. You talking about not being funny actually is funny.
But I suck at trying to be funny. If it comes up in conversation, great. But if I say, okay, now this is a spot where I'm going to tell a joke and I'm going to lead everybody in, I'm going to hit them with a punchline at the end, it's just like, yeah. So our show is really about the business of the wrestling business. because even though Bruce knows a lot about the business of the wrestling business and experienced a lot of those things, I was the president of a division at Turner Broadcasting that not only produced professional wrestling, but I was the president of the company that defeated the WWF while Bruce Prichard was an employee there for a period of 83 freaking weeks. Hence the name of the show. So my point of view and perspective is more of the business of the wrestling business as opposed to the road stories and the funny stories of the wrestling business.
You're going to be touching on a lot of subjects and a lot of the business of it. And when you look at back the business, part of that business when you were there was celebrity involvement. And it has been, even before you were there.
Long before me.
Celebrity involvement's been there, and it's still that at that point. But, geez, some of the names, when I think about it, like a Dennis Rodman or Karl Malone.
By the way, Dennis Rodman, who I put on the wrestling map, yours truly, put him on the wrestling map. Dennis Rodman was one of the key members of the NWO. Guess who is on his way to Singapore with Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un? He is the third man in the world peace trifecta, Dennis Rodman.
And some of that we can attribute to his work with WCW.
Yeah, I'll take credit for anything, brother. Doesn't matter. I've learned. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Just take credit for it. People will believe it.
That's amazing that he's going on that trip. Because I know he's good friends with him. I mean, he's been there before. He's brought basketball over there and everything like that. That's amazing when you think about it, that you have the President of the United States and Dennis Rodman actually going on the trip.
Dennis is friends with Donald Trump, and Dennis is friends with Kim Jong-un. Who better to bring? Who would you bring?
In that scenario, no, that would be it.
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali, if he was alive.
I brought Muhammad Ali to North Korea in 1995. I tried that once. It didn't work out quite as well for me as it did for Dennis Rodman. But I brought Muhammad Ali to Pyongyang, North Korea as a part of a big wrestling event called the World Peace Festival in Pyongyang. It was a 2-day event that drew over 350,000 people over the course of 2 days. That's true, though. Now, I'm not taking credit for something that wasn't true. That is true.
What can you say, though, about just working with Muhammad?
It was amazing. You know, I had worked with Muhammad Ali maybe a year previous to that. Didn't really get to know him the first time around. You know, got to talk to him and associate with him. But the second time, I had some counterparts in Tokyo that I was working with that called me and asked me if I could convince Muhammad Ali to go over to Pyongyang, North Korea as a part of this big wrestling event. I thought, well, you know, all he can do is say no. You know, it doesn't cost anything to try. So I, through my relationships at Turner Broadcasting, reached out to Muhammad, and I laid it all out for him, and he couldn't wait to go. He was excited. So for me to be able to go over first of all, to be responsible for bringing him to Pyongyang, North Korea was a pretty big deal to me. But the best part of it is I got to spend a lot of time with Muhammad. I got to know him on a personal level. And I don't want to say we were very, very close, but you know, about a year later, after that trip was over, I went to Tokyo again with my family. I brought my wife and my 2 kids. And my son was about 12 or 13 at the time. And we went to this event, and Muhammad Ali was standing over, and it was a big green room, you know. And Muhammad Ali was standing over the corner, and he waved over to me, and he pointed to my son. He waved my son over. And my son stood there and got a picture with Muhammad. And then Muhammad Ali, you know, bent down and whispered in his ear, and he said, "You're a good-looking young man. I bet you get all the girls, don't you?" And my son just broke out laughing, and it was it was a lighthearted moment, but it also brought tears to my eyes because it was a moment in history to see someone who I looked up to. You know, I was a young kid, you know, when Muhammad Ali fought Sonny Liston, and I remember all those amazing fights. So for me to be in the same room with Muhammad Ali and then see my son reacting with him that way was just so meaningful.